Some of the oldest stories ever written down aren't about human kings or heroes. They're about gods going to war. Today, we're opening up an ancient case file, looking into a conflict that, according to 5,000-year-old texts, almost tore a divine civilization apart.
And no, that's not a line from some modern movie. That quote is echoing down to us from ancient Mesopotamia. It's describing beings they called the Anunnaki, turning on each other. It's an accusation that's been etched in clay, just waiting for us for 5,000 years. And that really is the central mystery, isn't it? What could possibly push beings with that much power into a full-blown conflict? Well, the answers are preserved on those clay tablets, and let me tell you, they are probably not what you're expecting. Okay, so to get to the bottom of this, we have to go right to the source. Our evidence isn't just guesswork or speculation, it's a collection of actual, physical artifacts that have somehow survived for thousands and thousands of years.
Evidence we're looking at are these amazing fired clay tablets. Scribes in ancient cities like Babylon would take a stylus and press these little wedge-shaped marks into the wet clay. That's cuneiform. And just to give you some perspective, these records are older than the pyramids of Giza. We're talking about humanity's very first written epics.
Now, the two big ones for our case are the Atrahasis and the Enuma Elish. And these aren't just single books, they're complex stories that were copied and recopied for centuries. What's absolutely wild is that there are thousands of these tablets just sitting in museum basements, completely untranslated. I mean, who knows what other stories are still waiting to be discovered?
So, who are the main subjects of our investigation? The Anunnaki. In these myths, they are the top brass, a council of the most powerful, senior gods. You can think of them as the divine ruling class. But as we're about to see, that ruling class was anything but stable.
So here's the first big twist. The first major conflict we read about isn't some grand cosmic battle between equals. It's something way more relatable. It was a labor dispute.
The texts talk about this whole other class of junior gods, the Igigi, who basically worked for the Anunnaki. Now, they were still gods powerful by our standards, but in the divine pecking order, they were the manual laborers.
The Atrahasis epic lays it out almost like a police report. It starts with 40 years of back-breaking labor. The Igigi were digging out the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Finally, they just had enough. They staged a full-on rebellion, burned their tools, and marched on the house of their boss, the big god Enlil. So now the Anunnaki Council is facing this crippling strike, and they desperately need a solution. And this is where the story takes a truly bizarre turn. This is the moment everything changes. One of the gods, a brilliant and clever one named Enki, comes up with a radical idea. He basically says, let's just create a totally new primitive worker, a being designed specifically to take over the hard labor that the Igigi don't want to do anymore.
And right there, that's the core of our case file. In these ancient myths, humanity's origin isn't some story about divine love. It's about divine problem solving. We were created to be replacement workers, literally manufactured to end a strike. It's an idea that created a cosmic order that probably looked very familiar to the Mesopotamians, a world built on the hard work of the many for the powerful few. But creating humanity didn't actually solve the real problem. All it did was create a new flashpoint for a really old rivalry that had been brewing at the very top of the divine food chain. At the heart of this whole thing were two half-brothers, Enlil and Enki. Enlil, the commander, was all about strict order and control. He saw humanity as a tool, and maybe even a threat. But Enki, the scientist who actually created us, he felt differently. He seems to have consistently acted as humanity's protector, often going behind Enlil's back to give us a little help. And this rivalry between the brothers gets even messier with the next generation. See, Enki's son, Marduk, he inherited all his father's intelligence, but he combined it with this ruthless ambition that was about to flip the whole board.
The Enuma Elish pretty much tells the story of Marduk's hostile takeover. A new, terrifying cosmic monster named Tiamat shows up, and the old guard of gods, including Enlil, are totally powerless. The young Marduk sees his opening. He says he'll fight Tiamat, but his price is absolute total power. The older gods are desperate, so they agree. He wins, and just like that, there's a new king of the gods.
Okay, so we've got a workers' rebellion, a bitter family feud, and a violent coup. But what does it all mean? How are we even supposed to interpret these incredibly dramatic stories today? Well, for that, we need to call in the expert witnesses. So, the mainstream academic view gives us a few options. 1. These are just foundational myths, epic stories that use divine characters to explain the conflict between order and chaos. Or they could be straight-up political propaganda. That story of Marduk winning, for example, just happened to become the state religion of Babylon, which conveniently justified Babylon's dominance over all its rivals.
And then there's another, much more modern interpretation you've probably heard of, the ancient astronaut theory. This view suggests the Anunnaki weren't gods at all, but were actual extraterrestrial visitors, and these myths are just a scrambled memory of their time here on Earth.
And you know, this whole debate can come down to the translation of a single word. The writer Zecharia Sitchin translated Anunnaki to mean those who from heaven to earth came. But academic scholars, using dictionaries written by the ancient scribes themselves, say the root word Anunna actually means of royal seed or princely offspring. Two completely different methods, and you get two vastly different conclusions.
So, after looking at the evidence from all these different angles, we're left with a case that is still fascinatingly open, with central questions that are still echoing through the thousands of years.
What's really undeniable, though, is just the power of these stories. The fact that a civilization, right at the dawn of writing, chose to carve these epic tales into clay is incredible. They somehow survived floods, the fall of entire empires, and the literal sands of time to reach us today.
And that leaves us with the final enduring question. Were these stories just clever metaphors to explain the natural world, or political tools to keep people in power? Or could we be reading a very distorted, very old, but very real memory of events that our ancient ancestors believed actually happened? For now, the case file